Good hunting. Under whose headship? Said Feo gravely. Good hunting. Woon Toller am I, was the answer. He meant that he was a solitary wolf fending for himself, as do many wolves in the south. Woon Toller means an outlier, one who lies out from any pack. Then he panted, and they could see his heartbeats shake him backward and forward. What moves? Said Feo, for that is the question all the jungle asks after the Fial cries. The dole of the Deccan. Red Dog, the killer. They came from the south saying the Deccan was empty and killing out by the way. When this moon was new, there were 4 to me, my mate and 3 cubs. At the dawn wind, I found them stiff in the grass. Then sought I my blood right and found the dole. How many? Said Mowgli quickly. I do not know. 3 of them will kill no more. But at last they drove me like the buck. On my 3 legs they drove me. He thrust out his mangled forefoot, all dark with dried blood. There were cruel bites low down on his side, and his throat was torn and worried. Eat, said Akela, rising up from the meat Mowgli had brought him, and the outlier flung himself upon it. What Woon Toller had said meant that the dole, the red hunting dog of the Deccan, was moving to kill, and the pack knew well that even the tiger will surrender a new kill to the dole. They drive straight through the jungle, and what they meet they pull down and tear to pieces. Though they're not as big nor half as cunning as the wolf, they are very strong and very numerous. The dole do not begin to call themselves a pack till they are 100 strong, whereas 40 wolves make a very fair pack indeed. Akela knew something of the doles too, for he said to Mowgli quietly, It is better to die in a full pack than leaderless and alone. This is good hunting, and my last. But, as men live, thou hast very many more nights and days, little brother. Go north and lie down, and if any live after the dole has gone by, he shall bring thee word of the fight. Ah, said Mowgli gravely. Must I go to the marshes and catch little fish and sleep in a tree? Or must I ask help of the monkey people and crack nuts, while the pack fight below? It is to the death, said Akela. Thou hast never met the dole, the red killer. Even the striped one. Listen now, said Mowgli. When the dole come, Mowgli and the free people are of one skin for that hunting. This my knife shall be as a tooth to the pack, and I do not think it is so blunt. This is my word. The pack answered with one deep, crashing bark that sounded in the night like a big tree falling. Feo and Akela must make ready for the battle. I go to count the dogs. He hurried off into the darkness, wild with excitement, hardly looking where he set foot, and the natural consequence was that he tripped full length over Kaa's great coils, where the python lay watching a deer path near the river. Kshaw! Said Kaa angrily. Is this jungle work, to stamp and tramp and undo a night's hunting when the game are moving so well too? Oh, the fault was mine, said Mowgli, picking himself up. Indeed, I was seeking thee, Flathead, but each time we meet, thou art longer and broader by the length of my arm. There is none like thee in the jungle, wise, old, strong, and most beautiful Kaa. Now whither does this trail lead? Kaa's voice was gentler. Not a moon since, there was a manling with a knife threw stones at my head and called me bad little tree-cat names because I lay asleep in the open. Mowgli told him all that had happened in the jungle that night. Wise I may be, said Kaa at the end, but deaf I surely am. Else I should have heard the Fial. How many be the dole? I've not yet seen. I came hot foot to thee. Oh, Kaa, it will be good hunting. Few of us will see another moon. Dost thou strike in this? Remember, thou art a man, and remember what pack cast thee out. Let the wolf look to the dog, thou art a man. It is true that I am a man, said Mowgli, but this night I have said that I am a wolf. I am of the free people, Kaa. Till the dole have gone by, my word comes not back to me. But what is in thy stomach to do when the dole come? They must swim the Waingunga. I thought to meet them with my knife in the shallows, the pack behind me, and so stabbing and thrusting, we a little might turn them downstream. The dole do not turn, said Kaa. There will be neither manling nor wolf cub when that hunting is done, but only dry bones. Hast thou a better plan, Kaa? We will go to the river, said Kaa, and I will show thee what is to be done against the dole. He turned, straight as an arrow, for the main stream of the Waingunga, plunging in a little above the pool that hid the Peace Rock, Mowgli at his side. Nay, do not swim. I go swiftly. My back, little brother. Mowgli tucked his left arm round Kaa's neck, dropped his right close to his body, and straightened his feet. Then Kaa breasted the current as he alone could, and the ripple of the checked water stood up in a frill round Mowgli's neck, and he waved his feet to and fro in the eddy under the python's lashing sides. A mile or two above the Peace Rock, the Waingunga narrows between a gorge of marble rocks from 80 to 100 feet high, and the current runs like a mill race between and over all manner of ugly stones. Mowgli was looking at the gorge on either side and sniffing uneasily, for there was a sweetish, sourish smell in the air, very like the smell of a big anthill on a hot day. Instinctively, he lowered himself in the water, only raising his head to breathe from time to time, and Kaa came to anchor with a double twist of his tail round a sunken rock, holding Mowgli in the hollow of a coil while the water raced on. "This is the place of death," said the boy. "Why do we come here?" "Who is the master of the jungle here?" whispered Kaa. "The little people of the rocks," Mowgli answered. "It is the place of death, Kaa." The split and weather-worn rocks of the gorge of the Waingunga had been used since the beginning of the jungle by the little people of the rocks, the busy, furious, black wild bees of India, and, as Mowgli knew well, all trails turned off half a mile before they reached the gorge. For centuries, the little people had hived and swarmed from cleft to cleft, and swarmed again, staining the white marble with stale honey, and made their combs tall and deep in the dark of the inner caves, where neither man nor beast, nor fire nor water had ever touched them. The length of the gorge on both sides was hung, as it were, with black shimmery velvet curtains, clotted millions of the sleeping bees. The mere sharp smell of them was enough to frighten anyone who knew what the little people were. "Now I will tell thee," said Kaa. "A hunted buck from the south many rains ago came hither, not knowing the jungle, a pack on his trail. Being made blind with fear, he leaped from above, the pack running by sight, for they were hot and blind on the trail. The sun was high, and the little people were many and very angry. Many, too, were those of the pack who leaped into the Waingunga, but they were dead ere they took water. Those who did not leap died also in the rocks above, but the buck lived because he came first, running for his life, leaping ere the little people were aware, and was in the river when they gathered to kill. The pack, following, was altogether lost under the weight of the little people. Look now. If the dole follow thee, hot and blind, looking only at thy shoulders, those who do not die up above will take water either here or lower down, for the little people will rise up and cover them. Now the Waingunga is hungry water, and they will go down, such as live, to the shallows by the Seoni lairs, and there thy pack may meet them by the throat." "Aye," said Mowgli. Better could not be till the rains fall in the dry season. There is now only the little matter of the run and the leap. I will make me known to the doles, so that they shall follow me very closely. Thou wilt stay here, Carr, till I come again with my doles? Aye, and for thy sake only I will carry word to the pack, that they may know where to look for the dole. But what if they kill thee in the jungle, or the little people kill thee before thou canst leap down to the river? When tomorrow comes we will kill for tomorrow, said Mowgli, quoting a jungle saying. He loosed his arm from the python's neck and went down the gorge like a log in a freshet, paddling toward the far bank, where he found slack water, and laughing aloud from sheer happiness. He had often, with Baloo's help, robbed bees' nests in single trees, and he knew that the little people hated the smell of wild garlic. So he gathered a small bundle of it, tied it up with a bark string, and then followed Woon Toller's blood trail as it ran southerly from the lairs, for some 5 miles, looking at the trees with his head on one side and chuckling as he looked. Woon Toller's trail, all rank with dark blood spots, ran under a forest of thick trees that grew close together and stretched away northeastward, gradually growing thinner and thinner to within 2 miles of the Bee Rocks. From the last tree to the low scrub of the Bee Rocks was open country. Mowgli trotted along under the trees, judging distances between branch and branch, occasionally climbing up a trunk and taking a trial leap from one tree to another, till he came to the open ground, which he studied very carefully. Then he turned, picked up Woon Toller's trail where he left it, settled himself in a tree with an outrunning branch some 8 feet from the ground, and sat still, sharpening his knife on the sole of his foot and singing to himself. A little before midday, when the sun was very warm, he heard the patter of feet and smelt the abominable smell of the Dole pack as they trotted pitilessly along Woon Toller's trail. He watched the sharp bay head of the leader snuffling along the trail and gave him good hunting. The brute looked up, and his companions halted behind him. Scores and scores of red dogs with low-hung tails, heavy shoulders, weak quarters, and bloody mouths. Fully 200 must have gathered below him, but he could see that the leader sniffed hungrily on Woon Toller's trail and tried to drag the pack forward. That would never do, or they would be at the lairs in broad daylight, and Mowgli meant to hold them under his tree till dusk. "By whose leave do we come here?" said Mowgli. "All jungles are our jungle," was the reply, and the dole that gave it bared his white teeth. Mowgli looked down with a smile, and imitated perfectly the sharp chitter-chatter of Chikai, the leaping rat of the Deccan, meaning the doles to understand that he considered them no better than Chikai. The pack closed up round the tree trunk, and the leader bayed savagely, calling Mowgli a tree-ape. This was exactly what Mowgli wanted. He laid himself down along the branch, his cheek to the bark, his right arm free, and there he told the pack what he thought and knew about them, their manners, their customs, their mates, and their puppies. There is no speech in the world so rancorous and so stinging as the language the jungle people use to show scorn and contempt. Slowly and deliberately, Mowgli drove the doles from silence to growls, from growls to yells, and from yells to hoarse, slavery ravings. The big bay leader had leaped many times in the air, but Mowgli dared not risk a false blow. At last, made furious beyond his natural strength, the leader bounded up 7 or 8 feet clear of the ground. Then Mowgli's hand shot out like the head of a tree snake, and gripped him by the scruff of his neck, and the branch shook with a jar as his weight fell back, almost wrenching Mowgli to the ground. But he never loosed his grip, and inch by inch he hauled the beast, hanging like a drowned jackal, up on the branch. With his left hand, he reached for his knife and cut off the red, bushy tail, flinging the dhole back to earth again. That was all he needed. The pack would not go forward on Woontolla's trail now, till they had killed Mowgli, or Mowgli had killed them. He saw them settle down, in circles with a quiver of the haunches that meant they were going to stay, and so he climbed to a higher crotch, settled his back comfortably, and went to sleep. After 3 or 4 hours, he waked and counted the pack. They were all there, silent, husky, and dry, with eyes of steel. The sun was beginning to sink. In half an hour, the little people of the rocks would be ending their labors. "I myself will tear out thy stomach," yelled the leader, scratching at the foot of the tree. "Go home, red dog, and cry that an ape has done this. You will not go? Come then with me, and I will make you very wise." Mowgli moved monkey fashion into the next tree, and so on into the next, and the next, the pack following with lifted, hungry heads. And when he came to the last tree, he took the garlic and rubbed himself all over carefully, and the dholes yelled with scorn. "Ape with a wolf's tongue, dost thou think to cover thy scent?" they cried. "We follow to the death." "Take thy tail," said Mowgli, flinging it back along the course he had taken. The pack instinctively rushed after it. "And follow now, to the death." He had slipped down the tree trunk and headed like the wind for the Bee Rocks before the dholes saw what he would do. They gave one deep howl and settled down to the long lobbing canter that can at the last run down anything that runs. Mowgli knew their pack pace to be much slower than that of the wolves, or he would never have risked a 2-mile run in full sight. They were sure that the boy was theirs at last, and he was sure that he held them to play with as he pleased. All his trouble was to keep them sufficiently hot behind him to prevent their turning off too soon. He ran cleanly, evenly, and springingly, the tailless leader not 5 yards behind him, and the pack tailing out perhaps a 1/4 of a mile, crazy and blind with rage. He reserved his last effort for the rush across the Bee Rocks. The little people had gone to sleep in the early twilight, but as Mowgli's first footfalls rang on the hollow ground, he heard a sound as though all the earth were humming. Then he ran as he had never run in his life before. He heard a roar like the roar of the sea in a cave, saw with the tail of his eye the air grow dark behind him, saw the current of the Waingunga far below, and a flat, diamond-shaped head in the water, leaped outward with all his strength, the tailless dhole snapping at his shoulder in mid-air, and dropped feet first to the safety of the river, breathless and triumphant. There was not a sting upon him, for the smell of the garlic had checked the little people for just the few seconds that he was among them. When he rose, Kaa's coils were steadying him, and things were bounding over the edge of the cliff. Great lumps, it seemed, of clustered bees falling like plummets. But before any lump touched water, the bees flew upward, and the body of a dhole whirled downstream. Overhead, they could hear furious short yells that were drowned in a roar like breakers, the roar of the wings of the little people of the rocks. There were dholes who had leaped short into the trees on the cliffs, and the bees blotted out their shapes. But the greater number of them, maddened by the stings, had flung themselves into the river, and as Kaa said, the Waingunga was hungry water. Kaa held Mowgli fast till the boy had recovered his breath. "We must not stay here," he said. "The little people are roused indeed. Come. The rest is with thy brethren below yonder. Good hunting, little brother. And remember, the dhole bites low." Nearer and nearer came the bay of the Seoni wolves, and a bend in the river drove the dholes forward among the sands and shoals opposite the lairs. The bank was lined with burning eyes, and except for the horrible fial that had never stopped since sundown, there was no sound in the jungle. The entire pack flung themselves at the shore, threshing and squattering through the water till the face of the Waingunga was all white and torn, and the great ripples went from side to side like bow waves from a boat. Mowgli followed the rush, stabbing and slicing as the dholes, huddled together, rushed up the river beach in one wave. Then the long fight began, heaving and straining and splitting and scattering and narrowing and broadening along the red, wet sands and over and between the tangled tree roots, for even now the dholes were 2 to 1. But they met wolves fighting for all that made the pack, and not only the short, high, deep-chested, white-tusked hunters of the pack, but the anxious-eyed lahinis, the she-wolves of the lair, fighting for their litters, with here and there a yearling wolf, his first coat still half woolly, tugging and grappling by their sides. Mowgli's knife came and went without ceasing. A locked and swaying mob moved from right to left and from left to right along the bank. Here would be a heaving mound, which would break like a water blister, and throw up 4 or 5 mangled dogs, each striving to get back to the center. Here would be a single wolf, borne down by 2 or 3 dholes. Here a yearling cub would be held up by the pressure round him, though he was already dead. Once Mowgli passed a Kala, a dhole on either flank, and his all but toothless jaws closed over the loins of a third, and once he saw Feo, his teeth set in the throat of a dhole, tugging the unwilling beast forward till the yearlings could finish him. But the bulk of the fight was blind flurry and smother in the dark, hit, trip and tumble, yelp, groan, and worry, 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 round him and behind him and above him. Dhole after dhole was slinking away now from those dark and bloody sands to the river, to the thick jungle upstream or downstream as he saw the road clear. From under a mound of 9 dead rose a Kala's head, and Mowgli dropped on his knees beside the lone wolf. "Said I not it would be my last fight?" a Kala gasped. "It is. Good hunting. And thou, little brother?" "I live, having killed many." "Even so. I die now. I would die by thee, little brother. It is long since the old days of Shere Khan, and a man-cub that rolled naked in the dust." "Nay, nay, I am a wolf. I am of one skin with the free people," Mowgli cried. "It is no will of mine that I am a man." "Thou art a man, little brother. Thou art a man. Or else the pack had fled before the dhole. My life I owe to thee, and today thou hast saved the pack, even as once I saved thee. All debts are paid now. This hunting is ended." Mowgli sat with his head on his knees, careless of anything else, while the remnant of the flying dholes were being overtaken and run down by the merciless lahinis. Little by little, the cries died away, and the wolves returned limping to take stock of the losses. 15 of the pack, as well as half a dozen lahinis, lay dead by the river. Of the others, not one was unmarked. And Mowgli sat through it all till the cold daybreak, when Feo's wet, red muzzle was dropped in his hand, and Mowgli drew back to show the gaunt body of a Kala. "Good hunting," said Feo, as though a Kala were still alive, and then, over his bitten shoulder to the others, "Howl, dogs, a wolf has died tonight." But of all the pack of 200 fighting dholes, whose boast was that all jungles were their jungle, and that no living thing could stand before them, not one returned to the Deccan to carry that word. The spring running. In the second year after the great fight with Red Dog and the death of Akela, Mowgli was 17 years old. He looked older, for hard exercise and the best of good eating had given him strength and growth far beyond his age. He could swing by one hand from a top branch for half an hour at a time. He could stop a young buck in mid-gallop and throw him sideways by the head. The jungle people who used to fear him for his wits feared him now for his strength, and when he moved quickly on his own affairs, the mere whisper of his coming cleared the wood paths. One day, Bagheera and Mowgli were lying out far up the side of a hill overlooking the Waingunga, and the morning mists hung below them in bands of white and green. It was the end of the cold weather. The leaves on the trees looked worn and faded, and there was a dry, ticking rustle everywhere when the wind blew. Bagheera sniffed the morning air with a deep, hollow cough. "The year turns," he said. "The jungle goes forward. The time of new talk is near. It is good." "I shall know when the time of new talk is here," said Mowgli, "because then thou and the others all run away and leave me alone." "But indeed, little brother," Bagheera began, "we do not—" "I say ye do," said Mowgli angrily. "Ye do run away, and I, who am the master of the jungle, must needs walk alone. In an Indian jungle, the seasons slide one into the other almost without division. There is one day when all things are tired, and the very smells as they drift on the heavy air are old and used. Then there is another day, to the eye, nothing whatever has changed, when all the smells are new and delightful, and the whiskers of the jungle people quiver to their roots, and the winter hair comes away from their sides in long, draggled locks. Then perhaps a little rain falls, and all the trees and the bushes and the bamboos and the mosses wake with a noise of growing that you can almost hear. And under this noise runs, day and night, a deep hum. That is the noise of the spring, a vibrating boom which is neither bees nor falling water nor the wind in the treetops, but the purring of the warm, happy world. Up to this year, Mowgli had always delighted in the turn of the seasons. Like all his people, spring was the season he chose for his flittings, moving, for the mere joy of rushing through the warm air, 30, 40, or 50 miles between twilight and the morning star, and coming back panting and laughing and wreathed with strange flowers. But this spring, Mowgli's stomach was changed in him. Ever since the bamboo shoots turned spotty brown, he'd been looking forward to the morning when the smells would change. But when the morning came, and Mo, the peacock, blazing in bronze and blue and gold, cried it aloud all along the misty woods, and Mowgli opened his mouth to send on the cry, the words choked between his teeth, and a feeling came over him that began at his toes and ended in his hair, a feeling of pure unhappiness, so that he looked himself over to be sure that he'd not trod on a thorn. More cried the new smells, the other birds took it over, and from the rocks by the Waingunga he heard Bagheera's hoarse scream, something between the scream of an eagle and the neighing of a horse. There was a yelling and scattering of monkey people in the new budding branches above, and there stood Mowgli, his chest filled to answer Mo, sinking in little gasps as the breath was driven out of it by this unhappiness. "It is time to make a running," he said to himself. "Tonight I will cross the ranges. Yes, I will make a spring running to the marshes of the north and back again. I have hunted too easily too long. The 4 shall come with me, for they grow as fat as white grubs." He called, but never one of the 4 answered. They were far beyond earshot, singing over the spring songs with the other wolves of the pack. Mowgli gave the sharp barking note, but his only answer was the mocking meow of the little spotted tree cat winding in and out among the branches for early birds' nests. At this he shook all over with rage, and then he became very haughty, though there was no one to see him, and stalked severely down the hillside, chin up and eyebrows down. That night he set off on his spring running. The moon splashed her light full on rock and pool, slipped it between trunk and creeper, and sifted it through a million leaves. Forgetting his unhappiness, Mowgli sang aloud with pure delight as he settled into his stride. It was more like flying than anything else, for he had chosen the long downward slope that leads to the northern marshes through the heart of the main jungle. When he tired of ground going, he threw up his hands monkey fashion to the nearest creeper and seemed to float rather than to climb up into the thin branches, whence he would follow a tree road till his mood changed, and he shot downward in a long leafy curve to the levels again. So he ran, sometimes shouting, sometimes singing to himself, the happiest thing in all the jungle that night. He came at last to the great marsh that was his farthest hunting ground, and crossed it swiftly and surely. The marsh ended in a broad plain where a light twinkled. It was a long time since Mowgli had concerned himself with the doings of men, but this night the glimmer of the red flower drew him forward. He trod through the dew-loaded grasses till he came to the hut where the light stood. 3 or 4 yelping dogs gave tongue, for he was on the outskirts of a village. The door of the hut opened, and a woman stood peering into the darkness. A child cried, and the woman said over her shoulder, "Sleep. It was but a jackal that waked the dogs. In a little time the morning comes." Mowgli in the grass began to shake as though he had a fever. He knew that voice well, but to make sure he cried softly, surprised to find how man's talk came back. "Meswa! Oh, Meswa!" "Who calls?" said the woman, a quiver in her voice. "Hast thou forgotten?" said Mowgli. His throat was dry as he spoke. "If it be thou, what name did I give thee?" said the woman. "Natu," said Mowgli, for as you remember, that was the name Meswa gave him when he first came to the man-pack. "Come, my son," she called, and Mowgli stepped into the light and looked full at Meswa, the woman who'd been good to him and whose life he had saved from the man-pack so long before. She was older, and her hair was grey, but her eyes and her voice had not changed. "My son," she stammered, and then sinking to his feet, "But it is no longer my son. It is a godling of the woods." As he stood in the red light of the oil lamp, strong, tall, and beautiful, his long black hair sweeping over his shoulders, the knife swinging at his neck, and his head crowned with a wreath of white jasmine, he might easily have been mistaken for some wild god of a jungle legend. The child, half asleep on a cot, sprang up and shrieked aloud with terror. Meswa turned to soothe him, while Mowgli stood still. "What wilt thou eat and drink?" Meswa murmured. "This is all thine. We owe our lives to thee." "Where is he? The man that dug in the dirt when he was afraid on that night?" "He is dead. A year ago." "And he?" Mowgli pointed to the child. "My son, that was born 2 rains ago. And if thou art Natu, whom the tiger carried away," Meswa went on, "he is then thy younger brother. Give him an elder brother's blessing." "What do I know of the thing called a blessing? I am neither a godling nor his brother. And, oh, mother, my heart is heavy in me." Mowgli shivered as he set down the child. "Like enough," said Meswa, bustling among the cooking pots. "This comes of running about the marshes by night. Beyond question, the fever has soaked thee to the marrow." Mowgli smiled a little at the idea of anything in the jungle hurting him. "I will make a fire, and thou shalt drink warm milk." Mowgli sat down muttering, with his face in his hands. All manner of strange feelings that he'd never felt before were running over him, exactly as though he'd been poisoned, and he felt dizzy and a little sick. He drank the warm milk in long gulps, Mesrour patting him on the shoulder from time to time. He wanted to finish his spring running, but the child insisted on sitting in his arms, and Mesrour would have it that his long blue-black hair must be combed out. So she sang as she combed, foolish little baby songs, now calling Mowgli her son, and now begging him to give some of his jungle power to the child. The hut door was closed, but Mowgli heard a sound he knew well, and saw Mesrour's jaw drop with horror as a great grey paw came under the bottom of the door, and Grey Brother outside whined a muffled and penitent whine of anxiety and fear. "Out and wait! You would not come when I called," said Mowgli in jungle talk without turning his head, and the great grey paw disappeared. "Oh, do not bring thy servants with thee," said Mesrour. "We have always lived at peace with the jungle." "It is peace," said Mowgli, rising. "Think of that night on the road to Kaniwara. There were scores of such folk before thee and behind thee. But I see that even in springtime, the jungle people do not always forget. Mother, I go." Mesrour drew aside humbly, but as his hand was on the door, the mother in her made her throw her arms round Mowgli's neck again and again. "Oh, come back," she whispered. "Son or no son, come back, for I love thee. By night or by day, this door is never shut to thee." Mowgli's throat worked as though the cords in it were being pulled, and his voice seemed to be dragged from it as he answered, "I will surely come back." "And now," he said, as he put by the head of the fawning wolf on the threshold, "I have a little cry against thee, Grey Brother. Why came ye not all four when I called?" We were singing in the jungle the new songs, for this is the time of new talk. But as soon as the songs were sung, I followed thy trail. Why, I ran from all the others and followed hot foot. We follow thee always, except in the time of new talk. Have I not followed thee tonight?" "Aye, but would thou follow me again and again, Grey Brother?" Grey Brother was silent. When he spoke, he growled to himself, "The Black One spoke truth." And he said, "Man goes to man at the last. Raksha, our mother, said." "So also said Akela on the night of the Red Dog," Mowgli muttered. "So also says Kaa, who is wiser than us all. What dost thou say, Grey Brother?" "Well, they cast thee out once with bad talk. They cut thy mouth with stones. They sent Buldu to slay thee. They would have thrown thee into the Red Flower. Thou, and not I, hast said that they are evil and senseless. Thou, and not I, didst let in the jungle upon them. Thou, and not I, didst make song against them, more bitter even than our song against Red Dog. I ask thee what thou sayest." They were talking as they ran. Grey Brother cantered on a while without replying, and then he said, "Man-cub, master of the jungle, son of Raksha, lair brother to me, thy trail is my trail, thy lair is my lair, thy kill is my kill, and thy death fight is my death fight. I speak for the three, but what wilt thou say to the jungle?" "That is well thought. Go before and cry them all to the Council Rock, and I will tell them what is in my stomach." At any other season, the news would have called all the jungle together with bristling necks, but now they were busy hunting and fighting and killing and singing. So when Mowgli, heavy-hearted, came up through the well-remembered rocks to the place where he'd been brought into the council, he found only the four, Baloo, who was nearly blind with age, and the heavy, cold-blooded Kaa coiled round Akela's empty seat. "Thy trail ends here, then, manling," said Kaa, as Mowgli threw himself down, his face in his hands. "Cry thy cry. We be of one blood, thou and I, man and snake together." "My strength is gone from me," the boy moaned. It is not any poison. I lie down, but I do not rest. I run the spring running, but I am not made still. The red flower is in my body, my bones are water, and I know not what I know.
Oh, what need of talk? Said Baloo slowly, turning his head to where Mowgli lay. I said it, but Mowgli should drive Mowgli back to the man-pack. But who listens now to Baloo? Bagheera. Where is Bagheera this night? He knows also. It is the law.
When we met at Cold Lairs, Manling, I knew it, said Kaa. Man goes to man at the last, though the jungle does not cast him out. The jungle does not cast me out, then? Mowgli stammered.
Little frog, take thine own trail. Make thy lair with thine own blood, and pack, and people. But when there is need of foot, or tooth, or eye, or a word carried swiftly by night, remember, master of the jungle is thine at call.
My brothers, cried Mowgli, throwing up his arms with a sob. I know not what I know. I would not go, but I am drawn by both feet. How shall I leave these nights?
Nay, look up, little brother, Baloo repeated. There is no shame in this hunting. When the honey is eaten, we leave the empty hive.
Having cast the skin, said Kaa, we may not creep into it afresh. It is the law.
Listen, dearest of all to me, said Baloo. There is neither word nor will here to hold thee back. Look up. Who may question the master of the jungle? I saw thee playing among the white pebbles yonder when thou wast a little frog, and Bagheera, that bought thee for the price of a young bull newly killed, saw thee also. Of that looking over, we two only remain, for Raksha, thy lair mother, is dead with thy lair father. The old wolf pack is long since dead. Thou knowest whither Shere Khan went, and Akela died among the does, where, but for thy wisdom and strength, the second Seoni pack would also have died. There remains nothing but old bones. It is no longer the man-cub that asks leave of his pack, but the master of the jungle that changes his trail. Who shall question man in his ways?
His words were cut short by a roar and a crash in the thicket below, and Bagheera, light, strong, and terrible as always, stood before him.
Little brother, all debts are paid now. For the rest, my word is Baloo's word. Remember, Bagheera loved thee, he cried, and bounded away. At the foot of the hill he cried again, long and loud, Good hunting on a new trail, master of the jungle. Remember, Bagheera loved thee. Thou hast heard, said Baloo. There is no more. Go now. But first, come to me, O wise little frog. Come to me.
It is hard to cast the skin, said Kaa, as Mowgli sobbed and sobbed, with his head on the blind bear's side and his arms round his neck.
The stars are